Good morning, everyone. The Secretary-General held a telephone call today with Dr. Åke Sällström, head of the United Nations mission to investigate allegations of the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian Arab Republic. Dr. Sällström, who has just returned to The Hague with the rest of his expert team after work in Syria from the 19th to the 31st of August, briefed the Secretary-General on the next stages of the investigation process. All preparations for classifying the samples are progressing well. Samples will begin to be transferred to laboratories tomorrow. Dr. Sällström told the Secretary-General that two Syrian officials were observing the process. The whole process will be done strictly adhering to the highest established standards of verification recognized by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. In light of the horrendous magnitude of the 21st of August incident in the Ghouta area of Damascus, the Secretary-General asked Dr. Sällström to expedite the mission's analysis of the samples and information it had obtained without jeopardizing the scientific timelines required for accurate analysis, and to report the results to him as soon as possible, and they discussed ways to further accelerate the process. The Secretary-General personally thanked Professor Sällström for his undertaking and for the performance of the team while in Syria, in spite of the difficult and dangerous circumstances. And I just wanted to update you a little on the humanitarian picture in Syria. The UN is continuing its critical humanitarian work in Syria, where and when possible, as well as in neighboring countries. For example, the World Food Programme targeted 3 million people with food aid in August, and last week it dispatched 2,000 emergency ready-to-eat rations for 10,000 people in Latakia. In Aleppo, where fighting and the spike in prices are leading to food shortages, the program sought to feed more than 350,000 people in August. In the first 7 months of this year, the World Health Organization has coordinated the provision of assistance to 3.7 million people in Syria. The UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, has reached more than 180,000 uprooted children with health support in clinics, and it's also helped more than 10 million people in Syria access drinking water. And for its part, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and its partners have reached more than 1.5 million people with much needed supplies. And of course, there are many more people outside of Syria in neighboring countries receiving assistance. I'd also advise you that the Secretary-General spoke this morning with the Foreign Minister of France, Mr. Fabius, and he will continue to stay in touch with world leaders in the days to come. Yes?
Thank you, Martin. So now that the U.S. hasn't started the military strike yet, does the SG believe that there is a window or an opportunity for diplomacy? What is he doing exactly on that? And my second question, is he going to brief the Security Council anytime soon about the recent information he got from Syria, from Sällström and Mrs. King?
Well, at this point, to answer your second question first, at this point I'm not aware of any full Security Council meeting. As you'll be aware, the Secretary-General did speak to the permanent members of the Security Council already, and he intends to speak to the non-permanent members of the Security Council in the days to come. And I think that will probably be on Tuesday. We can give you more details as we get closer to that. With regard to your first question, I would simply say that the Secretary-General took note of the announcement by President Obama yesterday on the referral to Congress. I can tell you he regards it as one aspect of an effort to achieve a broad-based international consensus on measures in response to any use of chemical weapons. Use of chemical weapons will not be accepted under any circumstances, and there should be no impunity, and any perpetrators of such a horrific crime against humanity must be held accountable. The UN investigation mission should be given an opportunity to succeed. The Secretary-General applauds the bravery of the team of UN experts who undertook their on-site fact-finding activities despite grave security risks. And finally, the Secretary-General reiterates the primary role of the Security Council in maintaining and restoring international peace and security, including in any case where the use of chemical weapons is established. As such, he believes the Council should stand firm and united in agreeing on measures in response to any use of chemical weapons. Yes, Pam.
Martin, does the Secretary General plan to meet with either President Obama or President Putin at the G20, and will Syria be on the agenda? And then just a separate, will Dr. Sellstrom, Professor Sellstrom, be on the return trip to Syria? Thank you.
On the G20, needless to say, Syria is likely to figure rather prominently in any discussions, in addition to all of the discussions about the global economy, sustainable development, and the other topics which would ordinarily be discussed there. At this point, I cannot say precisely with whom the Secretary General will be meeting, but of course there will be gathered there in St. Petersburg the major leaders from the major countries of the world, industrialized economies in the world, and we'll keep you posted as we get closer to that. But I don't have any set itinerary at this point, yes.
And on Dr. Sellstrom returning?
Well, we've said that the team has given an undertaking to return. We have not said when, and we have not said precisely what the composition of that team will be. Tala.
Thank you. Two short questions. The first one is, you mentioned two officials, Syrian officials, are accompanying the samples to ensure the credibility of the samples. Why aren't there two officials from the oppositions? Just noticed that you didn't mention that, unless there are, that are accompanying to ensure the credibility of the samples. And secondly, you mentioned that the SG is encouraging Sellstrom to get these results as soon as possible without jeopardizing the credibility of the tests. Do you see a feasibility that this timeline will coincide with the Congress voting in the first week of September, that there will be convergence of evidence?
I beg your pardon, I forgot to remind you about the microphone.
Sorry, thank you. First question is, I forgot what the first question is now.
Two Syrian officials and
There's two Syrian officials, but you didn't mention there's two rebels, or opposition, I should say, officials watching out for the credibility of the samples. And the second one, now that he is egging and asking Sellstrom to expedite the results, do you see a feasibility that there's a convergence of evidence in the first week of September? Is that a possibility while the Congress is making its decision that we have the results from the United Nations?
Well, I wouldn't speculate on that latter part of your question. I would simply reiterate what we've said, that the United Nations mission is uniquely capable of establishing in an impartial and credible manner the facts of any use of chemical weapons based directly on evidence collected on the ground. We're not giving a timeline. Despite various reports of different timelines, we are not giving a timeline. And one of the reasons is precisely what I said earlier on, and you picked up on it, that the Secretary General discussed with Dr. Sellstrom ways to accelerate this process while keeping strictly within the scientific bounds that there are, including adhering to the standards set down by the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Which brings me to your first question. The Secretary General's mechanism, so the guidelines for this procedure, set out very clearly who should be there to oversee the chain of custody, and that is why there are two Syrian government officials there, and that's where I would leave it. Because the guidelines specify precisely what the mechanism should be to ensure the chain of custody. And as I've said, and I would repeat again, this is all being done strictly in adherence with the established standards for verification set out by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Nizar, and then I'm coming to you. Yes.
Yeah, Martin, the Secretary General has indicated that the Security Council members should be united on that, and that no unilateral action to be taken against Syria. Or
don't put words into his mouth.
But this is what it implies. I mean,
well, just listen to what I said, okay?
Anyway. Mr. Jaffer yesterday addressed the Secretary General in a letter asking him to use his office as a guardian of the charter in order to prevent unilateral action against his country by any party, especially after what Mr. Obama has said. Is there any reaction to that letter? What kind of actions do you expect?
No, not at this point, Nizar. Let's just repeat what I've already said on numerous occasions, and the Secretary General has said equally often, and that is that he would underscore the importance of the Charter, and as I just said, the Secretary General reiterates the primary role of the Security Council in maintaining and restoring international peace and security. Okay, yes.
Thank you. It's been 10 days since the attacks. The US has already put out the results of its blood and tissue samples. Are you confident you can match the timing within your own result process?
But let me just repeat what I just said.
I do understand, obviously, the timeline here is totally key given the process in Congress happening right now.
Yes, we are not specifying a timeline. We're simply saying that it is being done as fast as it is possible to do within the scientific constraints. The Secretary General is obviously very keen, as is the rest of the international community, that this should be done as swiftly as possible, but you need to be able to adhere to the standards so that the scientific process of verification is credible. And just to answer your point, when you said that the US has announced the results of its evidence, let me just repeat that the United Nations mission is uniquely capable of establishing in an impartial and credible manner the facts of any use of chemical weapons based directly on evidence collected on the grounds, and that relates to chain of custody.
Sorry,
James, yes, you do, and then I'm coming to James. Go.
The Secretary General in Austria said that he would be briefing the Security Council once he'd heard from Angela Kane. That doesn't appear to have happened. The P5 were briefed on Friday prior to that first briefing. Does he intend to give the P5 any further details about the progress in the forthcoming week, and what happened to that original suggestion in Austria?
He said he would be briefing the Security Council. That can be done in numerous forms. And I have just said that in addition to the discussion with the permanent 5 members, the Secretary General intends to speak to the non-permanent 10 members in the coming days, probably on Tuesday. And it is, of course, for the Security Council itself to invite the Secretary General to speak to them as one body. The Secretary General is seeking to reach out to the member states, and this is part of that process.
He was very specific in Austria that he would be briefing the Security
Well, I'm
Council.
being very specific now.
So he was inaccurate then?
No, it's not inaccurate. He has said he is willing and ready to brief the Security Council. It is for the Security Council to invite him to brief them. James.
We know about the problem with the shooting incident on the ground when they were in Syria. Were there any other problems? Because Secretary of State John Kerry, when he spoke on Friday, said when the UN inspectors finally gained access, that access, as we now know, was restricted and controlled. Did Professor Sellstrom report that that was the case?
Well, I can already say, regardless of what the Secretary General and Dr. Sellstrom discussed this morning, that while in the country, the mission was able to access all locations it had identified as priority sites, and it was able to conduct the fact-finding activities it deemed necessary. The mission did have to overcome serious safety concerns, and as you just mentioned on one occasion while traveling, the mission came under fire by unknown assailants in a buffer area. Okay. Yes, Matthew.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Martin. This morning, as I'm sure you saw Secretary Kerry said very specifically, talked about blood and hair samples.
I just answered that question.
I understand that you said that, but what I wanted to understand is your answer said that the UN is uniquely qualified because of chain of custody.
Uniquely capable.
Capable. Okay. So they obviously believe that their lab has moved pretty quickly on this. So what I wanted to know is how do you? I understand that if it's only in their custody, the idea would be it doesn't have the credibility to the world as a whole, but it seems like their lab has moved pretty fast. Are you saying that their lab work is less than credible? Have they shared this evidence with the UN as the Secretary General requested? And I wanted to ask you to answer, to respond to, yesterday President Obama said, quote, "I'm confident in the case our government has made without waiting for UN inspectors. I'm comfortable going forward without the approval of the Security Council." It's really the first part. What does the Secretary General say to a member state ignoring this, uniquely capable entity and announcing the results that Mr. Kerry did today?
I've already characterized the Secretary General's thoughts on that last part of your question. I don't intend to go back over that. And I also can simply, all I can do is repeat what I already said, that the United Nations mission is uniquely capable of establishing in an impartial and credible manner the facts of any use of chemical weapons based directly on evidence collected from the ground. Okay.
And has the U.S. shared any of this evidence that is described with the UN?
Well, as we've repeatedly said, member states are encouraged to share information they may have with regard to alleged incidents. Yes.
Emma Bonino, the Italian foreign minister, said repeatedly that any outside intervention in the Syrian crisis by any power, unless it happens under the umbrella, if you like, of the United Nations, is likely to trigger a major conflict, perhaps even a world war. Is this the UN view?
I don't really want to comment on every individual politician's and ministers' comments on this around the world. We have repeatedly said that there must be a political solution to this crisis, that ultimately a military solution is not an option. At some point there will need to be a political solution, and the sooner that can happen, the better. Sangwon.
Two questions. You said Syrian opposition, they're not part of the observers monitoring the process as per guidelines that specify what the mechanism should be. That guideline is as was agreed with Ms. Kane and the Syrian government. Is that correct?
Well, just
with the Syrian government.
The Secretary General's mechanism has guidelines that encompass any investigation underneath that mechanism. There are the guidelines are online, and also it's the key part here is that this is all being done in the strictest adherence to the standards that exist for verification as laid down by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Can I just follow on this, please?
And second question. Okay.
Talal, you can when someone's finished her second question.
So when you say member states are encouraged to share information, so has the U.S. shared the information that Secretary Kerry was mentioning today on NBC?
That I do not know. I would simply say member states are encouraged to provide information that they may have. And that's actually an important distinction. Talal, and then I'm coming to you, okay? Carla, but first of all, Talal.
Thank you. Just to follow up, I don't know who put these guidelines, but logic states that if two parties have a major stake in finding out which one of them has used a chemical weapon, and we have two officers from the Syrian regime, but we don't have any... Officials, I'm sorry. The word officers doesn't mean military in this case. Two officials from the Syrian regimes, but we don't have anybody from the other party who has a major stake. Since the United Nations does not represent the opposition, shouldn't there have been, whoever put these guidelines, and we don't know so far, has taken account of this?
Well, the Secretary General's mechanism is something that, as I mentioned yesterday, derives from a General Assembly resolution later adhered to and ratified by the Security Council. In any case, I don't need to tell you, Talal, being an expert in the region, that there isn't just one opposition group, so I'm not quite sure how you would decide who would tag along. So I would leave it there. So